In this video, we're going to attempt to remove a snapped off bolt which happened when we took the water pump off this 2004 Mercedes SL55 AMG. These little M6 bolts are only torqued to about 10 Newton meters, but the reason they snap off is that if your water pump has a leak and you start to get water down into this section here, you'll start to get rust around the head of the bolt. So even with minimal torque removing one of these bolts, you can shear it. The simple way that people might try and get this out is simply to put a set of mole grips around there and wind that out. But the problem with that is, first of all, you'll ruin the threads and therefore any other potential options will be negated. But secondly, these bolts here are held in with thread lock, and in this particular case also with rust, and therefore you've got more chance of simply shearing the bolt there, in which case you really have got problems. A slightly better alternative is to get two ultra thin M6 nuts and try and lock them together and to wind out the broken stud that way. And we've used an angle grinder to make this spanner a little bit thinner to allow us to get in there. Now, it's worth mentioning this company, Accu. Again, I know I've mentioned them before, but they have an excellent professional service whereby you pay £30 a year and postage is free, and they deliver the next day. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're stuck and you need one nut or you need a special part, that can be with you the next day without having to pay astronomical postage prices. Before you try and remove a snapped bolt, it's a good idea to soak it, what's left of it, with some kind of penetrant. We use Plus Gas. Ideally you want to use something that isn't WD-40. A good penetrant, leave it to soak overnight. If the bolt is in an awkward position, you need to use something like putty or something, so you can make a little shelf and actually let the bolt soak in the penetrant so that the penetrant can wick up the threads. Now, another method is to put a nut on and then weld that nut on, and sometimes the process of actually welding that nut on generates enough heat to break the rust, and then you can obviously just get a spanner on there and wind that out. You do have to be really careful when you're welding on an engine block to make sure all the electrics are disconnected. And also in the context of this car, it'd be slightly difficult to get a welding torch down there. So what I'm going to try and do is use a magnetic induction torch to get this out. And a magnetic induction torch is basically some loops of copper that you put around here, and then you heat this bolt up to red hot, and hopefully that will allow us to wind it out. This is our magnetic induction torch here, but the problem is that the copper wire on here is so thick that it doesn't really allow us to get many loops of that wire around that broken stud there, and therefore the more loops you get, the more you can heat that up. So what we're going to try and do to get around that is to put a thin nut on first, and then we're going to put a 6mm connecting nut on, and we're going to heat the connecting nut up and see if that is enough to transfer heat to that stud and allow us to get this out. First, we're going to wind this thin stainless steel nut on that we got from Accu. Now we're going to use one of these M6 connecting nuts. Now this particular connecting nut came from Toolstation, and the threads don't start right at the end, so if you try and wind that on, there's not enough thread. So we're going to angle grind the end off so that we've got threads right at the end. Right, let's try that. Okay, that's much better. So now we've got plenty of distance on there. I'm hoping that the heat will be transferred through to the bolt. Let's see how that goes. You can see that's glowing red hot now, how quickly that gets hot. And we're hoping that that heat is transferred. Well, I don't like giving up, but I just can't get enough heat on that stud using a magnetic induction torch to break that bond. So plan C is I'm going to use some Loctite 638. Now this is what we used to fix the calipers on this car,
and that is a very, very strong Loctite. I'm just going to put a bit on the threads, leave it overnight, and come back and see if perchance we can actually wind that out just by simply gluing a nut on there. I doubt that very much. We'll probably end up shearing it and it'll all go horribly wrong, but I'm going to give it a go. Well, here goes nothing. I'm not for 1 second expecting this to work, but our options are getting limited. Got that on there nice and tight. Now we're just going to wait overnight, let that dry, and come back and see if miraculously we turn that and the bolt just comes out and we can get back to our life. Well, it's over 24 hours later, and I must admit I'm a little bit nervous because it suddenly occurred to me that the downside of this method here using Loctite is that Loctite has a chance of wicking its way into the threads inside the timing case cover, in which case you will not get that stud out without using 500-degree heat. So here we go. I'm going to put a spanner on this side and a socket on this side just so I can get some even torque. Either that will spin straight off and it won't have glued on, because of course once you soak something with penetrant it's not going to glue particularly well, or the stud will shear off, in which case we're going to have to take the whole front end of the car off and drill it out. So let's see what happens. Well, it's turning, but I suspect that's turning way too easily, and I suspect what's happening is this is just going to screw straight off, and that's not going to have bonded on there. Unfortunately, I can't for a second imagine that. Yeah, it's just coming out way too easily. I can't for a second imagine that that's actually worked. That'd be just too good to be true, but stranger things have happened. Yeah. Unfortunately, I think this is just turning straight off. Well, it was worth a try. So we've tried everything and it's come to phone a friend now. Luckily, my next door neighbour's son, Oscar, has got a welder. He's done some welding. He's one of those guys that actually does something useful with his life. We're going to do a couple of test welds first, just to get the right current, and then we're going to attempt to weld a nut onto there. Hopefully the heat from the welder will help to melt the thread lock, and hopefully we'll be able to weld a nut on there, and who knows, we maybe even be able to wind it out and get on with our lives. So we're using quite high current. We're using the EcoFlow Delta there because we don't have any power down in the garage, and we'll just let that cool down and then we'll see if we've actually got a good bond there. Now what we do have to worry about is that the splatter, we don't end up setting fire to the car. So what I'll do is I'll take that towel out and cover any rubber hoses. Okay, let's try this thing. This is either going to shear off. Okay, we're going to have to try that one again.
Did it break?
Yeah.
Oh no.
You feeling confident?
More confident. I think third will be it, but I'm more confident.
Okay,
more confident.
You hold the camera. Oh my sweet.
Oh my god.
I can't believe
oh my god.
I've tried to get
Oh my
this out.
god.
Oh my lord. Look at that. Bad boy is coming out. High five. You are amazing. Thank you. This video here. In the next video, we're going to be fitting that water pump. Big thanks to Oscar. Really appreciate your welding prowess. And hopefully we'll get this car back on the road in the next day or two.